Good morning. Okay, but I need to unmute.
Can we? You should mute.
Okay. And we have fans.
Can I test this?
If you're getting hot, because you know, we have no AC, because it's a living building, you're welcome. So grab a couple fans. Yeah, I don't think we want to open the window, there might be smoke coming from the.
Okay, we have 11 participants.
Yeah, that's okay.
Be more casual on the
Okay.
17th. I mean,
Can we-
I'm gonna roll when I sleep.
Sun coming out.
Yeah, This cop's trying to get here on time. It's running.
I feel like with this weather, Blade Runner was actually a documentary. The gray, the rain,
The acid rain.
the acid rain.
Can the folks online hear us? Specifically, Ms. Cola, if you could unmute for just a second and let us know.
Hello, good morning.
Thank you. Can you hear us?
Yes,
And sorry, could I have one of the board members speak just to make sure they are audible as well?
Good morning.
Ms. Cola, can you,
You hear
yes,
Natoli? Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
We're ready. All right.
Okay.
then. The 16 October 2024 board meeting of the Santa Monica Basin Groundwater Sustainability Agency is called to order. I apologize for the delay in beginning. This time, I would like all citizens to rise as you are able to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you and good morning. Ms. Gray, would you take the roll, please?
Yes, I will. Chair Natoli,
Here.
Vice Chair Wang,
Here.
Board Member Welsh,
Here.
Board Member Singletary,
Here.
Board Member Nguyen. Board Member Nguyen, if you are online and able to unmute yourself, if you could let us know that you're present. If you're raising your hand, I will take that as a sign that you're present. Thank you.
Raising a virtual hand.
Yes, great. So we have a quorum. We can move on.
Very well, thank you. Item 4, disclosure of ex parte communications for board members. Does anyone have ex partes to disclose?
No.
Right, seeing none, I'd like to go through right now the rules of conduct for our meeting. The board will only entertain comments that are civil. Anyone who becomes disruptive, disrespectful, repetitive, does not remain on topic, or impedes the orderly conduct of the meeting will be asked to sit down and given a warning by the chair of the board, or if attending virtually, will be muted. The individual will be asked to leave by the chair of the board if they continue with disruptive conduct for Government Code Section 54957.95. No warning is required if the individual is using force or threatening to use force against someone. Moving to item 5, consent items. We have approval of the minutes from the 17 July 2024 meeting. First, do we have any comments from the board about the minutes? And do I have a motion to accept the minutes and approve the minutes?
I'll move to accept and approve the meeting minutes.
And
I'll second.
is there any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Abstentions? Okay, motion passes.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to the public forum. This portion of the agenda may be utilized by any member of the public to address and ask questions of the board of directors on any matter not on the agenda within the jurisdiction of the Santa Monica Basin GSA. Depending upon the subject matter, The Board of Directors may be unable to respond at this time or until the specific item is placed on the agenda at a future board meeting in accordance with the Ralph M. Brown Act. Ms. Gray, do we have any speakers?
We do. We have an item to be read into the record by Ms. Judith Davies. The topic is plans for the Santa Monica Airport conversion to the Great Park, and this relates to overall water sustainability issues. As an artist living and working in Santa Monica for over 30 years, I have been active as well as listening to the various ideas for the future of the airport. And we have been invited to submit ideas and preferences in 2 earlier stages of surveys. Recently, the architectural firm Sasaki has also presented a 25-minute video, which can be seen on YouTube, discussing the basis of sustainability needs for Santa Monica's future, and particularly water sustainability. You can find this starting around 10 minutes after the background on the video. I assume that they are working closely with your agency. They explain several objectives in the following video with some concerns and also other projects they have worked on. However, I see the complexity and costs with so many options. I would prefer to hear how this plan and options would work with the Santa Monica Sustainability Agency. Some basic concern for starters pertaining to capturing and storing, reusing, replenishing water supply. The airport soils, runway hardscape, etc. with lead, gasoline, heavy metals, petrochemicals, et al. Should be removed from the area, not reused, buried, covered over, or re-landscaped to save costs. I can't imagine what is in those soils for over 100 years of constant operations in the airport. The airport will be closed by December 31st, 2028. It seems that there are sustainability issues with regard to water that should be worked out in the beginning. Water is the basis for everything. When they give options for recreation, ponds, forest areas, ecological wetland gardens, etc. I would love to hear more about how this would work with your agency. I also heard in the video that presently some of the water from the land around the airport goes to the Bayona Creek. This is another factor that should be studied as it currently may affect the wetlands, most likely with more pollutants. I'm including a link below with the most recent Sasaki educational video for the public for understanding and surveys for public input. There's a link to the video. Finally, I know this is not immediately concerning the topics of the agenda this week, so I submitted as general public comment with the hope that it can be perhaps a topic for another meeting in the future. This is a huge project, 195 acres, comprising more acres of land than any of our parks put together here in Santa Monica. It also could produce, preserve an enormous amount of clean, sustainable, reusable water, as well as other clean energy baseline principles of conservation, from fossil fuel-driven industry to clean air and water and energy resources. How great is that? Thank you and best wishes.
Thank you, Ms. Gray.
You're welcome.
And are there any other public comments?
There are no other public comments. I don't have any hands raised.
All right. We're moving on to item 7, informational items. 7A, Governor's Executive Order N-3-24.
Good morning. For the record, my name is Jill Weinberger. I'm with DUDEC. This informational item was requested at a previous board meeting, and because a number of important concerns have been raised about monitoring networks and the adequacy of monitoring networks in the subbasin, as well as ways to improve. Oh, I'm sorry, I've already moved on to the next one. Sorry, I'm gonna start again. For the record, I am Jill Weinberger and I'm still with DUDEC. I have just skipped forward too far in the slide, sorry. What I was about to talk about will be I believe our next item. This is about the Governor's Executive Order N-3-24. The history of this item is that we've brought this to the board's attention on a couple of other occasions. There have been a series of executive orders issued by the governor's office in relation to drought, and these have been statewide orders. The reason that they've come before this group is that Executive Order N-722, specifically paragraphs 9A and B of that original executive order, required coordination between a well permitting agency, in this case, the County of Los Angeles, and the Groundwater Sustainability Agency to determine the consistency of new wells with the Groundwater Sustainability Plan that was prepared for the Santa Monica subbasin. So under that executive order, there was a required step of coordination, and in fact, the well permitting agency needed to receive some sort of confirmation from the GSA that a new well permit was consistent, or at least not inconsistent in the language of the actual executive order with the GSP before that permitting agency could issue the permit. That original order was modified then by Executive Order N 323, and specifically paragraphs 4A and B of N 323, replaced the original language, but it was very similar. So what it did is it retracted those original paragraphs 9A and B. It placed back in all of the language from paragraphs 9A and B with some additional comments in them. So that was what happened with Executive Order N 323. Just last month, Executive Order N 324 was released, and that actually terminates paragraph 4 of N 323, except to the extent that it terminated paragraph 9 of the original executive order. And that is, it took me a very long time to struggle through this, but effectively what that does is it terminates that requirement to coordinate between the well permitting agency and the GSA. So that's no longer required under an executive order. That coordination is no longer specifically required under an executive order, right? So the County of Los Angeles no longer has to wait for this consistency determination from the GSA in order to issue a well permit. It reverts back to what was in place before the original executive order. So that's what the top bullet here says. County of Los Angeles is not required to wait for that consistency evaluation. And when I said it reverts back to pre that original executive order, what that also means for this group is that the City of Santa Monica and then the GSA had established an informal collaboration, very productive collaboration with the County of Los Angeles and people in the well permitting office there in charge of reviewing permits, such that the county would notify the GSA that a permit had been submitted. It did not require approval from the GSA, but it would notify the GSA that a permit had been submitted. Again, that was an informal coordination, and that is still anticipated to occur. And I apologize, just as I jumped ahead a little bit on this next item, I did forget the final bullet that you'll see on this slide here. And I also apologize that we're seeing sort of the double screen here, I'm projecting the actual screen to the public. And I'm noticing now that Ms. Cola has her hand up, so she will probably weigh in on the legal things that I've gotten wrong. But the last thing I wanted to say here is that under Sigma, and this is the section cited, the additional authority section, a groundwater sustainability agency may request of the county, and the county shall consider that the county forward permit request for the construction of new groundwater wells. So again, this is a forwarding, and it would be for new wells, for the enlarging of existing wells, and the reactivation of abandoned wells. And it would, again, just be this coordination step. It's not that the county is required to wait for any consistency determination from the GSA, but the GSA is welcome to reach out to the county formally to request that those permit applications be submitted to the GSA. So the GSA is aware of wells that are going in the subbasin. So this is an informational item. We will certainly take comment in just a second because I would definitely appreciate legal weigh in on this. I believe the hope with this item would be to come back in January with the consideration of formalizing that request to the county for approval by the board, so that there is a more formal agreement and a formal outreach to the county to request that these well permits be forwarded.
Ms. Cola?
Yes, I was just going to, everything you said was fine. I just wanted to clarify that if you wanted to give direction, the GSA could ask that staff bring back a resolution to be adopted with the request to the county at the next meeting. That's it.
Thank you, Ms. Cola. Is there any discussion from the board?
Yes. Director Lang. Go ahead, Director Lang.
I think it would be a good idea for us to establish something formal with LA County, given, it's great that we had this informal coordination already, but I think it'd be great to have a formal arrangement in place with LA County, especially with, the things we've dealt with already on all permitting and the GSA, as well as moving forward with LA County's LA County water plan, to support that and make sure we have a sustainable local water supply. So I would support, directing staff to reach out to LA County to have that discussion and put something formal in place.
Director Welch.
Yeah, ditto. I agree. We should establish a formal process and writing.
Agree.
And
I agree.
Director,
I agree. Yeah, we should formalize that process.
this was actually brought up a couple of weeks ago at my other GSA board meeting. And one of the things I requested at the time, first of all, let me ask a question. You said something, Dr. Weinberger, that was not brought up at my other GSA meeting, and that was that verification from the local GSA is no longer required. Could we still, not suggesting that we do it, but could we still do it?
Well, I will answer only from the technical side of things, and I will let attorneys weigh in on any legal ramifications, because that is certainly not my area of expertise. So if there's a formalized coordination or informal coordination with the county whereby the GSA receives a well permit to review, I believe the technical, there are two restraints on that, of a technical review of that. One is I believe the county is obligated to a certain turnaround time for review of those permits. And so I'm not sure that a GSA consistency review could be completed in time to be provided to the county by their turnaround deadline. I'm not sure what that turnaround deadline is, but I think it's relatively short, on the order of 5 to 10 working days is my guess. Don't quote me on that. I think the second thing, and this would be more of a legal question, is the funding for that and who would provide funding for that review. Because it's no longer required necessarily of an applicant, would be my understanding.
And that's fine. I'm not suggesting we go back to it. I just thought it was interesting that the wording was required. So that my hearing officer's brain, those different terminologies, come to the fore. But I would like to ask, and I agree with the board, I'd like for us to formalize the request for continuing information. But could we please have that reported then to the board quarterly? Could we have a standing item on the agenda? And this could just be a table format, the number of non-de minimis well applications, the number of de minimis well applications received and approved, and the beneficial use. And what I'm also wondering is, because that will give us an idea of what kind of pressure there is for new wells in the basin, but also it might give us a handle on, are we getting close to some sort of basin limit on our pumping capacity? So if we could have that standing report, I think it'd be helpful. Director Welch?
I was just curious, if we request and they're required to provide issued permits, is that, or could we ask for permits currently under review? So we kind of can see what's coming down the line.
My
Yeah,
understanding is both, and that because there's a strong working relationship already between the agencies, and the agency and the county, that the county has been very open to providing requests by the agency so that the agency is better able to understand the wells going in the basin and the current wells that are used in the basin.
But that we
So-
can see the applications, not just the approved permits.
Correct, and so, right, to date, the county has been a very good partner in all of the requests. So not only has the county provided the actual approved applications, but the county and the GSA have actually informally been coordinating so that the county does provide the GSA with well permit applications that have come in. Now, GSA, under the new executive order that repealed the previous ones, again, doesn't have that consistency determination role anymore, but the county has been good about sharing the information to say, this is an application that is before us, and you should be aware that this is within your base bounds.
And I'll even take that a step further. They're still referring anyone that calls up talking about a well installation to refer to the Santa Monica Basin website. So I received a phone call last week. Primarily, the two issues that have come up are for groundwater extraction to remediate groundwater contamination plumes. So one is in the city of Santa Monica. And it's my understanding the city has its own well ordinance that if you're putting an extraction well in the city of Santa Monica, you still must go to the GSA. The attorneys can correct me on that, which is different than the rest of the basin. Anyway, that polluter, responsible party wanted to put in 5 extraction wells, and the county had said you need to check with the Santa Monica Basin. So not even a talk about actual permit application, just the thought of, will we need to coordinate when we put this work plan together? And so the answer was yes, you're within the city of Santa Monica, a little bit different than the rest of the basin. And then the second one comes up with the Boeing, which is the same issue. If you're going to build a groundwater remediation pilot plant or test within the city of Santa Monica, you still have to confer with the GSA.
Any other comments from the board?
I guess more of a question or a comment, probably for both the board and GSA consultant, is that if we do go down the path of, you know, the consistency review, having a formal arrangement, I mentioned the turnaround time, potentially in the payment. I was wondering if those details would work out, because we're still providing a verification review, not necessarily voting or actually deciding a permit should be issued or not, right? We're only providing an opinion. We've already outlined what those criteria are in the GSP. We've already outlined what the application needs to have. Just curious, could our GSA consultant just provide their verification opinion, just like they did to us previously? There wasn't really any decision that we would make that impacts the, well, permitting issue. The ultimate authority is LA County. I wonder if that verification process could just stay with on the staff or GSA consultant side, not necessarily have to come to the board for every single one. If turnaround time is an issue, the issue of permit.
I would actually be concerned that, as Dr. Weinberger says, since public health, environmental health probably has a pretty short turnaround for approving the application, if environmental health approves an application and then 2 months later, the verification, or any point after that approval, our opinion of a verification goes back to environmental health and the applicant. If it doesn't agree with environmental health approving permit, that suddenly we're in another legal bind.
Well, I guess I was trying to streamline that process, that the GSA consultant review does not necessarily have to come to the board for agreement, so that we could review that quicker to align with their permanent turnaround timeline. I was kind of thinking of, like, for example, like our planning meetings, like not like every single planning review application where we give comments goes to our city council. That's all managed at the staff level. If that's something maybe we could consider, if LA County does indeed have a pretty tight turnaround time that we could still provide some meaningful input within that turnaround time. That's really the question, I guess, is want to consider something like that.
Sorry. go ahead.
Would that be possible?
The short answer from the consultant side is, do I think we could turn that around fairly quickly and perhaps even within the window of approval? Yes. I would defer to the county environmental health to explain what their approval process entails, because I don't know that they, and again, I would defer to them on this, but I'm not under the impression that they consider anything other than strict county rules and regulations on the construction specifics of a well. And so I don't know how this would dovetail with their process, and I think that would be something to investigate.
Yeah, I think it's to have that conversation with LA County, if that's even possible, I guess.
Well, this is supposed to be an informational item. Maybe we have to defer to the next meeting.
Right, I think it's at the end, we give direction for
Right,
our GSA
but-
consultant to have that conversation with LA County.
But in the meantime, if we don't have any other comments from the board, do we have anyone from the public who's?
I have, just Ms. Cola, but no, votes for the public. So Ms. Cola?
Yes, I just wanted to say that I agree there's some ambiguity as to what the legal significance is of having the county give notice. It's possible that it's really just a noticing issue, so you're aware of the well, and it doesn't necessarily give the GSA authority to add additional restrictions that are not already authorized for the county to issue the well permit. So this is something that we could discuss with county council and get back to you on at the next meeting if that's the direction to come back.
I would appreciate that, because just like with Director Wang, I'm a little concerned about, yes, we'll hear about these well applications, but if we can't comment on them or affect how they're implemented, I think that goes to our ability to manage the groundwater in the basin.
Right.
So if there's anything that public health could help us with or is able to work with us on, as far as giving some input to them with their decision, it would be helpful.
And it also may be worthwhile to just consider that, you know, since the GSA is also considering the groundwater registration ordinance, that it would work in sync, in that you would be advised of any potential future extractors, and then they would be required to provide the required information in order for you to assess any impacts. And so that's, you know, there may be value in just knowing who is going to ask for a well permit and then having the registration requirements apply to them.
I like that idea.
As you mentioned, Chairman told this is just an info item.
Yes.
But we could give direction to staff, right, on follow-up work to bring that back to the board.
I think we can give direction to the staff for follow-up
Okay.
for our next meeting in January.
Oh,
Yes, Director
question, on this informational item. So our existing well verification procedures, since those are tied to the executive order, like, is that whole verification procedure now no longer valid? I mean, to do something else, or is those procedures that are already in place, they still, like, can still use those because they were tied to that order, right? So,
I think those verification procedures develop in response to the order, not necessarily tied to it, meaning if the order is no longer valid, that doesn't mean the procedures isn't valid.
Okay.
It's just, there's no mechanism to requiring them to follow those procedures anymore, so that's, I think that's up to the GSA and LA County if they want us to establish that as a requirement within this basin, how we manage the basin. It's no longer a statewide requirement.
got it.
But perhaps there's something our consultants could think of that we could adapt the verification procedures to use toward in our evaluation of well applications in the basin.
Ms. Cola,
Oh, sorry.
go ahead. Ms. Cola, would you like to define?
Yes, I wanted to just clarify that independent from the executive order, there's authority in the water code to require registration, to require measurement. So I think the ordinance stands independent of the executive order. If to the extent there are any references in the ordinance that mention the executive order, we can delete those because there's independent authority under the water code.
Yay.
I think that would need to be a board action. That's not an administrative action that someone can just go delineate
Yeah.
the references.
Well,
Right,
Can
that's why
I-
we're giving information.
can I ask a question? I'm not sure, sorry, whether we were discussing the ordinance or the well verification.
My question was related to well verification.
Yeah.
Because verification was part of the full concurrence review.
Correct.
So that whole procedure that we had adopted in April was just the verification procedure. So if that then needs to be modified, then that I agree, we need to take new action. And that one in particular didn't have any mention of like the minimus or anything like that, right? So we would want to just make a clear distinction on this.
I have to go review. I think it maybe did have a mention of de minimis in it. But I think if board would also like to give direction as part of this item to come back with a review of the well procedures and their linkages to the executive order, I'm happy to also do that.
I think that will help.
So for clarification, because the city of Santa Monica, separate than the GSA, we have our own well ordinance. And I do believe we use those guidelines that were developed if someone wants to install. So the language, says that you have to have within city of Santa Monica, it says such expansion or extraction is approved by the Santa Monica GSA based upon determination by the Santa Monica Basin GSA that the extraction will not cause undesirable effects. So there's a chance that we would employ those requirements already established, because in the city of Santa Monica, you want to put a new well and they're going to have to come to this body. So they're actually very valuable.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Somebody's sinking a well in Santa Monica,
Santa Monica
city of
I
Santa
know it's
Monica. Do
confusing.
they still have to go through county, or because you have your
Absolutely.
ordinance, so county is still issuing the permit,
That's correct.
but they're
That's
doing it based on your ordinance? Does anybody know how the county's approval process is? Is it just administrative, or is there discretion? Independent? Is it
This
like
falls
all
on
your
the
paperwork is
applicant
there?
to
Okay.
do this. This does not fall on, this ordinance does not have, cannot put anything on the county. We're telling the applicant that you must get approval for Santa Monica Basin GSA.
Okay, so they can get a permit from county, but then to actually come to Santa Monica, is there a building permit issue? I'm a little.
It depends on where it's constructed, and if it's like in the public right of way, that would come to us, right, to get approval. But if it's in your own backyard, that's the hard part of figuring out where that's happening.
Okay, so they.
So the ones
or-
we get are
the
going
ordinance.
through the Los Angeles Regional Water Quality Control Board. They're putting together a work plan for groundwater remediation. And that's always been the policy. You have to have an approved Regional Water Quality Control Board work plan prior to putting any well, in for groundwater extraction and remediation. So it's a little bit more complicated when you're within the city versus the GSA boundaries.
The intent of that ordinance originally was to prevent private extraction wells in people's backyards.
Right.
For irrigation or.
But to Director Singletary's question, it might be helpful just to have a couple of sentence understanding of, I'm not public health, I'm regional planning. The public health procedures, what does environmental health do? Can they deny the permit? Just basically, what are their criteria for approval? I don't think it's much, but I don't remember for sure.
think generally LA County is a ministerial approval of well.
So it's a checklist. Is there any other discussion, comments?
If I could just,
I guess
note,
clear on the direction.
yeah, yeah,
That's fine.
Actually, I would like to make
Okay.
sure I'm clear on the direction. I think there are 4 items that I've understood, the board would like additional information on. First is the formal coordination with the county to receive well permit applications as they go to the county. Second is to have a discussion with county and report back to the board on inclusion of a consistency review in that process of approval and how that might work. Tied to that is a better understanding of the authority of public health or environmental health to approve or deny a permit, what that entails, what the review actually is. And lastly, on my list is a review of the well verification procedures and that initial process that we set up with this agency in response to the governor's executive order to look at consistency of well permits in the Santa Monica subbasin and see how that is tied to that original executive order and provide the board with some information on what may need to be changed in the process moving forward to make those changes.
and then the standing item on the agenda.
There we go.
Number 2.
Quarterly.
With, yeah, quarterly report of number of non-de minimis applications, number of de minimis applications, and beneficial use. And then this is being recorded, this meeting. Director Wang, you're so genteel in your voice, but if you could just project, that would be great. Use your stage voice.
Yes. I rarely hear that compliment. I'm usually told I'm too loud.
Be loud. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. We're moving on to 7B, GSA monitoring wells.
So as I said 20 minutes ago, sorry, as I started out, this item on monitoring wells in the subbasin was requested at the last meeting in response to a number of comments on the existing monitoring network, what can be improved, what do we know about water levels and groundwater quality in the subbasin. So the image that you're seeing in your board packet and on the screen on the right of the slide is from the GeoTracker database looking at all monitoring wells in the subbasin. The blue outline is the outline of the subbasin. All of those colored dots represent either a monitoring or a production well in the subbasin. And this is an image that was in the GSP as well. So this is a map from the GSP. You'll see that there's quite a lot of monitoring throughout the subbasin, and I think the folks in this room and hopefully the folks on the call are well aware that a lot of the monitoring is in response to historical industrial use in the basin, a number of leaking underground storage tanks, older industrial sites that have caused groundwater contamination. So there are about 1,500 monitoring wells in the subbasin, but the majority of those are screened in the very shallow layers of the subbasin, looking at that industrial contamination from the surface or the shallow subsurface. The production in this basin is predominantly deeper than 50 feet below land surface. And so the city of Santa Monica's production wells are screened 200, 300, 400 feet below land surface in this basin. And so that shallow monitoring is actually disconnected by a geologic layer that limits the movement of water between the shallow subsurface and the deeper layers of the aquifer. And in those deeper layers in the subbasin, there are approximately 200 monitoring wells that are screened. And I say this, there are 200 monitoring wells identified in the GSP that are screened in the Bayona and Silverado aquifers. These are the deeper layers that we're talking about, below that very roughly 50-foot cutoff. I hesitate when I say monitoring wells because 10 of these wells are in fact City of Santa Monica production wells, which we do monitor. So we take groundwater quality samples from those. I believe we actually, particularly when the wells have been turned off, we will look at water levels in those wells, but they're not strictly defined as a monitoring well because we do produce groundwater from them. The preference by DWR is to use strict groundwater monitoring wells, not production wells, to monitor your basin. But there is an understanding in Sigma that you need to have time to develop a monitoring network. And so to the extent that you rely on groundwater production wells for a time, they recognize and understand that. 10 wells I mentioned are City of Santa Monica production wells. 83 of the wells, other than these 10, are 83 are strict monitoring wells that are in fact monitored by the City of Santa Monica as a result of groundwater contamination concerns, as well as a need to understand the impacts of groundwater production on conditions in the subsurface. And then an additional 108 wells down in the southern part of the subbasin. I'm not sure if I have a pointer that I can use to show this, but there's a very dense cluster of brown and white dots down in the southern part of the subbasin. Those are associated with the Playa Vista investigation and remediation in that area. What you'll see from this map is that monitoring is really tied to very specific areas of the basin, and that additional monitoring in areas that do not currently have monitoring wells would help improve the understanding of groundwater conditions throughout the entire basin. And so in the GSP, there were a number of areas in the subbasin that were identified as lacking current monitoring wells that review groundwater conditions, again, in these deeper layers of the subbasin. And top among the well sites that could be added and was recommended in the GSP for addition is a well near Marina del Rey, adjacent to Marina del Rey, to address potential seawater intrusion. And that would be a monitoring well, preferably with multiple screen intervals, individually isolated, to understand the chloride concentrations and begin to establish chloride concentration trends with time to see if those are changing as a result of groundwater production in the subbasin. If we start to see chloride concentrations increase over time, that could be an indicator of seawater intrusion. It would be a precursor indicator that could be provided to the board to give the board better understanding that seawater intrusion may be coming to the production wells and give the board time to act accordingly to manage the basin. Additionally, so that's adjacent to Marina del Rey was our top priority for seawater intrusion identified in the GSP. Additionally, there could be monitoring wells installed within or adjacent to the Bayona Wetlands Ecological Reserve. We've heard a number of comments that is desired by stakeholders in the basin. As we look at the map, both the western and eastern areas of the subbasin also lack individual specific monitoring wells. So those could be targeted for a broader view of groundwater conditions throughout the subbasin. We've heard earlier today, and I think we'll hear again later today, that there is an ordinance being developed to meter groundwater extractions, because that's another monitoring data gap. Right now, all of the City of Santa Monica's wells are monitored, but other wells have not been, and we're closing that gap through coordination with stakeholders in the basin. And then additionally, in the GSP, there was a recommendation that the groundwater elevation monitoring occur within a 2-week window, one in the spring, one in the fall. That spring and fall timing conforms with DWR's recommendations for Sigma, so that you get, this is really tied to basins that have more of a influx of water and inflows during the winter and then a drawdown during the summer, particularly in agricultural regions. But it is in Sigma that they prefer a spring and a fall measurement. And the reason to have that within a certain narrower window of timing is so that you actually get the snapshot of basin conditions at a point in time that's close enough to understand groundwater elevations throughout the basin. As you start to spread those measurements out over longer periods of time, it's not certain that a well measured in March is going to have the same water level as if it's measured in April or May or June. So that's why the narrow timing of that. So these were the recommended improvements to the monitoring network that were made in the GSP. There has been progress certainly on metering extractions. There was a grant application that was submitted to seek funding for a monitoring well adjacent to Marina del Rey to address seawater intrusion. Unfortunately, that part of the application was not funded. Other parts were, which is fantastic for the GSA, but the monitoring well was not funded. And so I think with that, I will open it up to board discussion on the item, since this was brought up by the board at the last meeting.
Thank you, Dr. Lundman. Are there any questions or comments from the board?
I think, probably less of a question or a comment. It's probably fall more direction. I think, my understanding our staff was approached by USGS to try to locate also their interest in partnering on a monitoring well. We have partnered within the city of Santa Monica with monitoring well in the Olympic subbasin. This is also beneficial for them to refine their regional model as well, which I know I think we use as a basis of our modeling. And they're willing to pay for a portion of it too. That's probably the big advantage. So I would ask for our GSA consultant to work with USGS to identify location. Is if I recall correctly, some of the information they shared with us, they were actually recommending a spot outside of that yellow circle as well. That might be more beneficial for seawater intrusion monitoring. So it'd be good, I think, for our GSA consultant to get together with USGS to work on those details, see where we can collaborate.
Happy to do that.
I had a couple of questions. First, I was stunned. I was also stunned by the number of monitoring wells in Basin, but I realized that there's been a lot of industrial activity here for a really long time, and probably many of these are gas stations, former gas stations. Still, it's a stunning number, but just the number down south of Bayona Creek, 108 associated with Playa Vista. Why are there 108 just associated with Playa Vista in such a concentrated area? Do you have any idea? 108.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've reviewed the details of the efforts there, but there was substantial contamination that's being remediated. My understanding is that they're under orders to report on those remediation efforts, and I assume, and this is just strictly an assumption, that this is tied to plans that were worked on with the regional board and others to ensure appropriate remediation of the site.
I also wondered about the selection of the area around Marina del Rey inside the yellow circle. So I was wondering what were the criteria for selecting a location for the seawater intrusion well? Why that became the X marks the spot?
Yeah, the criteria there were actually previous discussions with the USGS, and as Director Wang mentioned, at the time that the GSP was prepared, the survey, the USGS had identified that area around Marina del Rey as a good potential for an additional well to constrain their model. And so we used the model to estimate seawater intrusion to understand basin dynamics as part of the GSP. And Intera, another consultant that has worked for this agency, and they could come back at a future meeting to brief you on this in more detail than I could. Agreed with the survey at the time that constraining the subsurface layering in that part of the basin would help improve the model calibration, because that is an area where we were seeing the potential for seawater intrusion in the model. But we did not have a well-constrained model layering in that area. Since then, the survey has done additional work, and sounds as though they've identified other areas that may be more beneficial for understanding their model and constraining their model, and we're happy to talk it through that with them and understand what that they've done to constrain a different area.
So this would be considered an area where possibly it's inland from, supposedly inland from any seawater intrusion. It'd be the lookout point, the safe lookout point.
I would hesitate to say that it is definitively inland of any seawater intrusion, because we don't have a well there right now. But it would be an area in which increasing trends in chloride concentration could be determined before those chloride concentration increases impacted anything farther inland in the basin. And so it'd be a good, for lack of a better term, sentinel well site to help identify potential problems, and also for us to be able to understand the reason that we would see any of those trends in the chloride concentrations. But simply an increasing trend in chloride does not necessarily mean seawater intrusion, but it would be a flag to investigate.
And as far as the number of wells, is there a thought of one well or two wells or three wells? Because I look at this and I think, yes, you mentioned the last well between the Olympic well field and the bay would be ideal as well.
There is no constraint on the number of wells other than the funding available.
That's the challenge.
Yes, yes,
tag.
yes.
I think if I was trying to provide some, like, the initial conversation with USGS, I think they were outlining 3 potential monitoring wells in that area, kind of like in the straight line, starting at the beach parking lot, I think, and going inland. And they still want to, that area that's circled in the yellow there, there's still value having there. They just thought if you only have money for one, there may be a best pay for the buck for the initial one, and then they do recommend 2 or 3 more down the road.
Thank you. Any other comments from the board? Do we have any public comments?
I do not have any hands up.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the discussion. Very interesting. Now we're moving on to.
Sorry, Chairman Tony, just want to make sure you guys are clear on the direction to the asking is to talk to USGS and GSA consulting, and then maybe come back at the next meeting on what that discussion.
Yes, understood. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry.
That's quite all right. I wish I knew everything, but I don't. So if I forget, let me know.
That's what we're here for.
That's what I need. That's what I need. All right, we're moving on to 7D, cost sharing discussion continued from.
7D, discuss the recharge area for this.
Oh.
It's okay.
We got your back, don't worry.
I want to move on to.
You and I are on the same page.
Roz, we're on the same one.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's only 9 a.m.
Give me a long day.
Item 7C, recharge area for the basin.
Thank you. This item was also brought up at the last board meeting for discussion, and I think for a reminder to the board and the public as to what the recharge area is for the Santa Monica subbasin, because I think I've discussed that a couple times, but perhaps I've not shown the map indicating what it is that I'm referring to. So on the right side of the screen, again, this is a map from the GSP that shows the blue outline of the subbasin itself. And then you'll see there's a darker gray line to the north of the subbasin that extends into the Santa Monica Mountains. There's both some hashing within that dark gray area. The hashing represents undeveloped areas within the Santa Monica Mountains. The, pardon me?
This is probably the state park, sorry.
Okay. And then the blue and yellow colors, I don't think there's much green, but any of the colored shaded areas on the map indicate the presence of soils at the surface that are conducive to surface water infiltration. So some soils are better at soaking up water than others, and these soil types were identified using the soil survey maps to show areas where surface precipitation could be absorbed by the soil and directed into the groundwater eventually. We all know, particularly from the previous discussion, it's a highly urbanized subbasin within the blue boundaries of the subbasin itself. And there's a lot of impervious pavement within the blue boundaries of the subbasin. So there is actually very little direct recharge from precipitation that occurs within the boundaries of the subbasin, within that blue boundary on the map. The primary recharge to the subbasin occurs as subsurface flow, so flow that actually comes in below land surface along the northern boundary of the subbasin. That is the primary source of recharge. And we see that in groundwater level elevations, that elevations are highest along groundwater level elevations are highest along that northern boundary, and they decline as you move to the south, which indicates that water is flowing from the north to the south overall in the subbasin. The last bullet just points to the contributing recharge areas and soil types that I've already discussed on the map. But the tie here is in the next slide, which is to say, how did we define this recharge area? And I apologize for the switch in colors, but the recharge area is now represented on this map. It's the brown shade, the brown line. And this is the underlying shading here is actually watersheds. So the recharge area, the contributing recharge area, was defined in the GSP as the extent of the watershed area that directly drained into the Santa Monica subbasin along that northern boundary. Development within that area could impact recharge to the subbasin, either through requests for additional wells used to irrigate crops, lawns, other things within that recharge area. That is taking, I'm not sure if that's, sorry, that there was a noise for folks that are signed in online. The wells in that area could be intercepting flow that would otherwise make it to the Santa Monica subbasin. Additionally, if you have additional impervious surfaces in that area, that would induce more rapid runoff that wouldn't necessarily have time to infiltrate into the subsurface and eventually make its way into recharge along the northern boundary of the subbasin. So if that runoff is too rapid, it ends up in the storm drain systems in the already urbanized areas and flows out to sea or flows to treatment plants that are, but it's not recharging the groundwater. And so that is the summary of the recharge area, and again, open this for discussion of this item.
Are there any comments or questions from the directors? Director?
I guess looking at this map on here with the recharge areas, seems like all of it's outside our boundary. Is the consideration here then to potentially approach DWR to increase our boundary and to include this so we can protect our recharge areas? Is that?
I believe that would be board discussion. I won't weigh in on that, but other than to say you're, other than to say that you are correct, that the area defined by the brown line on this particular map is outside the basin, the current basin boundary.
Then I guess the question for you guys, GSA consultant or even legal, is that possible with DWR to redefine basin boundaries?
I will say from the consultant side, and I will let legal weigh in, that yes, DWR does entertain periodically redefinition of basin boundaries. and this is not a legal remark at all, I have not yet seen DWR approve a basin boundary modification to include the watershed area.
And
My-
Ms. Cola, maybe.
Yeah, I guess last question
Yeah.
before we get to Ms. Cola is that area in anybody's basin right now? Like in any other groundwater basin?
No, right, so that is outside of the Department of Water Resources identified groundwater basins based on surface sediment types. That is a geologic outcrop area, so it doesn't have really much in the way of soil cover. So it is not defined as a groundwater basin at all under bulletin 118.
Jill, is the property north, Richard Slade, who's the water master, that's the adjudicated valley?
The north of that
I-
reach,
yeah,
that's on the other
I
side.
don't know.
Is the valley?
Just, the water master for San Fernando, that's like way beyond the limits of this map.
Yeah.
But on the southern boundary where it's blue, isn't that the adjudicated West Coast Basin?
Yes, but that is identified as a groundwater basin, a separate basin.
Okay, so.
Just curious on jurisdictions underlying that basin area. Yeah, whose jurisdiction?
Under the watershed
Yeah, the
area.
watershed.
You
know.
I think it's city of Los Angeles primarily. Some of that might be Beverly Hills, but I think there might be a little bit of it, but it's primarily city of Los Angeles. I don't think it goes west enough to get into the unincorporated area. It might, but much of that might be Topanga State Park.
I could certainly come back with jurisdictions within that boundary, but
You want to check also coastal commission? I know it shoots up.
Yeah, it might be 5 miles inland at that part. It
Yeah,
is in the Santa Monica Mountains.
so it'd be interesting to see what also
West.
comes under the LA.
It could be Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy properties, yeah.
Some of that, yes.
Ms. Cola?
So in looking at the water code, there is a process for the boundary revision. It doesn't the request for a boundary modification doesn't necessarily have to be made by the GSA, although I think it would help if the GSA were to work in concert. But the actual authority is for a local agency, defined as a local agency that has water supply, water management, or land use responsibilities within a groundwater basin. So I do think, for example, just as an example, that the city of Santa Monica could make a request. Obviously, if there are jurisdiction issues, that's something that we would have to explore with whoever has jurisdiction. But there is a provision for that in the water code, and perhaps the direction could be to research that issue, like what that process would be for the next meeting.
I guess I would add to Ms. Cola's comment about researching what that process looked like, as well as researching whose land, I guess, is that, or in that area. I can't rely on our GIS. We also call it GIS.
Boundary being recorded.
Our GIS section is, maybe JPL has a better one, but regional plannings is.
I know LA County is
Best.
pretty good, yeah.
the best.
I'm used area. That's how I'm mumbling this morning.
You misheard me on the recording. Any other comments from the board? And do we have anyone signed up to speak on this item?
I don't have any hands raised.
All right, well, whatever Ms. Cola said, I think.
Yeah, so we're gonna research, we'll look at the jurisdictional boundaries of that area and then research the water flows.
Right, and if it would be necessary to include a couple of cities, that would be helpful.
I'd like to better understand, if I may, the boundary. So the request is to look at the expanding of the boundary of the existing subbasin, and if so, in which direction?
North,
Yeah, it's to
North.
No,
To the
protect the
north line.
recharge areas.
protect the recharge area.
I think coterminous with that recharge area would be the basin modification request, should that move forward. But I think we need to do some research on that first.
The request is asking our GSA consultant to do a little additional research on that area of land and what that involves, as well as process, if that's even feasible to modify our basin boundary. And the intent is to protect the recharge area of the basin, which is, as you can see from that map, all the recharge is outside of our jurisdiction right now, so it's hard to maintain the sustainability of
Not all
groundwater
of
basin.
recharge, but
We
most.
won't have any say in the recharge area.
Yeah, I apologize if the groundwater, if the shading on the map is confusing. I could have had RGS folks clip it to just the basin boundary and the recharge area. But that is my understanding of the intent of the direction moving forward.
Understood.
Yeah.
That's clear, thank you.
Just one other question. If we extend that boundary, and I'm not sure about what other jurisdictions are under there, does that mean we expand this board participation? Just a thought. I don't know if there are any other jurisdictions other than us.
Well,
That could get interesting.
let's wait to get the information and find out.
There is a process in place, right, for basin boundary modifications. There's a scientific basin boundary modification process and a jurisdictional basin boundary modification process. So I think we need to look at all that and again, look at the underlying jurisdiction for that area.
There are basin boundary regulations as well.
I think Director Walsh's question more, like, do we need to add to our board?
Yeah.
Right. I don't think we're there yet.
Yeah, we need some more
You're more of the
information.
party.
But yeah, that's a potential one.
Hopefully it's not city building.
Well, the one thing to throw in there, because I know, John, LADWP, you issue letters when homeowners in that recharge area ask to put a well in. I know they go to LADWP, you issue a letter saying that you don't, I don't know the exact wording, you don't have jurisdiction. And then it then comes to the GSA to, so there's an informal or a formal process, but so you must have a map or something that you look at to issue that letter from
Correct. Within
LADWP.
our service area, we'll clarify what our authorities are, if any, that's essentially.
You have a map that maybe they can use in their research?
We just use the city boundary.
Okay, so
Yeah.
City of Los Angeles boundary, okay,
I think we can review jurisdictional boundaries.
okay.
Yeah.
That would help.
DWR has layered map on its website. I don't know if that's helpful.
All right, with there being nothing else, I think we are moving on to 7D.
That's right.
Sharing discussion.
Thank you. So 7D, cost sharing discussion. This is an informational item. This is not, we've had this back and forth on informational, and then it was in the action items for a number of meetings, and now it's back to informational because at the July 17th meeting, the board voted to draft an MOU listing the administrative cost sharing responsibilities. So I'm limiting my discussion on this slide to the administrative cost sharing responsibilities. They are outlined below. This went through a number of discussion times and has since that meeting been formalized in a draft MOU that my understanding will be circulated to individual board members after this meeting for review and, distribution through whatever your individual process is for accepting and approving that MOU. So the MOU would formalize the discussion from the last meeting that the city of Los Angeles has agreed to pay 20%. County of Los Angeles pays 20% of administrative costs. City of Beverly Hills would pay 2%. City of Culver City would pay 10%, and Santa Monica would pay the remaining 48%. And each member agency would pay their own legal costs for administration of the GSA. And that the cost sharing is only good through the current 5-year GSP contract and would be reopened and discussed as the next contract for GSP implementation is issued and awarded. What was not discussed, and this again is just an informational item for the board's consideration, what was not discussed at the previous meeting was implementation costs. And implementation cost sharing could involve pumpers sharing in the cost of implementation of the GSP. So pumpers in the basin impact basin conditions, and there may be a financial obligation desired by the board, this is for board discussion, to support sustainable management. And so that would be paid for by pumpers in the subbasin based on the average historical pumping records. And a base period would have to be established if that is the direction to investigate moving forward. It would be supported by the well ordinance to meter groundwater production. And we know that the city of Santa Monica currently produces groundwater from the basin. We have records from the city of Santa Monica on their groundwater production rates, historically dating back more than 30 years at this point. There are also private golf courses that use irrigation wells in the subbasin, and we have begun to get reports on irrigation, direct reports on irrigation from those wells. Prior to the last year or so, we were estimating groundwater demand based on irrigated acreage of the golf courses. And then there are other private well owners, including the cemetery in the southern part of the basin. I can't remember the name of the cemetery down there. And we'd have to investigate to make sure that we haven't missed any other private pumpers from the basin. So those would all be subject to the well metering ordinance that is being discussed and another item. So just for reference, the cost of a few of the projects identified in the GSP are a salt and nutrient management plan, which could be on the order of $300,000, as well as this monitoring well that was discussed in the previous item, depending on what our conversations with the USGS indicate. That monitoring well could be on the order of $1 million or more, depending on the construction of that well. So those are not insignificant costs. Lastly, legal costs, and this would not be legal costs related to administration, but legal costs related to litigation. And there's been no discussion on that other than that it would be determined by individual agencies after a litigation is filed. So that is the update on cost sharing for this item.
I could just add on the MOU. My understanding is that it would have been approved, presented and approved to this board before it went to the agencies themselves to be approved. I suppose it could be done the opposite way, but at some point the GSA needs to adopt the MOU. So you can do it at the next meeting and then the agencies can go get their approval, or you can get approval from the other agencies to enter into the MOU and then do it with the GSA, but it needs to be publicly noticed before this GSA report.
I think if I recall correctly from the last meeting was that we wanted to have a draft of that administrative cost sharing MOU. To then, I guess, vet internally within our leadership structure within each organization before that then comes to either of those actions, I think.
Okay.
So I think it was Culver City that asked that to be more formalized so that they could discuss that with either their city manager or something before we start that formal process in case there's modifications that needed, right? We don't want to approve something and come back and make changes again and approve it again. So I think right now where we're at is that draft MOU for then each of us to take it back to our leadership within our agencies to make sure everything's good before we take full action. And I think that was our understanding from the last meeting.
Yes. So question, so for LA, then we'll have to take formal board action on our side first, and then we'll come back and adopt it here?
That's what I'm asking. Are you're gonna discuss it each individually with your attorneys and come back, review it as the GSA and approve it, and then the agencies will formally approve it? Or your agencies are formally approving it and then giving their representatives authority to vote on it here?
I would,
Culver City's already approved it, our council's approved it, we're able to approve the cost share and then city management can approve the actual MOU. So we're good.
And Beverly Hills has approved, the city council has approved the 2% administrative costs. We would have to bring this back to our city council for formal adoption. So we're able to say that a 2% cost share is fine with us.
I don't know, Laura, if you're on, I'm not sure what the county process is, whether the county wants to see the approved MOU from the GSA first, or whether we could have the county sign and approve it first, and then have it come back to the GSA. I don't know if it matters.
Yeah, just a second. Did you have something you wanted to share first for Beverly
Oh,
Hills?
sure. Yeah, so this is Tilden Kim, City Attorney, Beverly Hills. So the City Council had approved, the option, that's outlined in the cost sharing, MOU in concept. We would need to go back to get formal approval of, the city manager to sign the agreement. But just so that I'm clear, if it's the, desire by this board to have, signed, agreements, MOUs presented to, hopefully to the board at the next meeting. But I don't know what formal approval is necessary by the board when, there's going to be signatories that have all executed the agreement. And I don't think the board itself is a signatory to the agreement. So
I guess the question is, do we need formal action here as a board to recommend that to then go back to each agencies?
well, I think
Right, if the
it
individual-
would be very helpful if there was at least some formal approval by the board that this final version is something that is approved by the board, so that we can go back, in the interim after this, to tell our constituents, our council that, that this board has approved it, and now it's ready to sign.
Okay, did you want me to, is this Ms. Jacobson you'd like? Okay. Ms. Jacobson, did you want to unmute yourself?
Hi, this is Laura Jacobson. I think the question is whether we can approve it internally without a formal board vote. I'm sorry. What was your question, Gina?
At the county, does the county require the MOU to be approved by this agency before the county would consider it?
No,
Okay.
no, we could do it either way.
Okay, Ms. Cola?
Yes, I was going to say that, I mean, my understanding was the members of the GSA had approved in concept the deal. I've been circulating an MOU to all of the attorneys to make sure that we're all on the same page. We are really close. It's just a matter of formatting and making sure that we have the correct signature blocks. And I think we have everybody but Beverly Hills just confirming the signatures are correct. And I would hate to have a new board approval with a change, because then we'd have to start all over again. So I mean, I would ask that we stick to what I thought was the original plan, which is you agreed in concept. We worked out, the attorneys worked out some of the language nits that each of us had on the MOU, and nothing has changed as far as the conceptual substantive approvals that the GSA gave at the last meeting. And then it's just a matter of attorneys sign off on the form, and then they take it back to their respective agencies. And then we all come back at the next meeting and hopefully report that it's been executed by all the parties. That was my hope, at least.
Sounds like that.
So, right, and also maybe we could even just structure this like a CEQA approval, where you're considering the CEQA document and the project, the same meeting, but the first thing you do is you say, we approve CEQA, and then you approve the project. So maybe at the next meeting, we see that all the agencies have approved it. It sounds like that would be acceptable. And then this board could adopt it. But I'm not sure we need that. I'm trying to remember, I think the last time we amended the MOU, we just amended the MOU. And once there were 5 signatures, it was done, because it's
The
an
MOU
MOU.
predated the formation of the board.
The last amendment to the MOU. But I guess what I'm hearing is, because we already gave direction for legal to, no, we amended those the bylaws, that
Right.
we amended at the board, not the MOU.
The MOU that paid for the GSB predated the formation of the board.
Well, we amended as a board with the bylaws.
At the, yeah, I'm just saying, at the last meeting, our motion was just to draft the MOU, which lists the cost sharing responsibilities for circulation to respective member agency boards. So I guess we didn't technically approve the cost share at that time. We thought that the MOU would be coming back for vote. So if we don't actually need to vote on that MOU, we maybe need to vote on the cost share.
Ms. Cola?
I would concur with that. I mean, I thought that already happened, the cost share, but maybe I don't have the right memory. But on the CEQA statement, I mean, typically each city is going to have their own CEQA statement, which, you know, would be some sort of categorical exemption or saying it's not a project. So I think each city would take care of the CEQA statement and when they do their adoption, and it would be in the recommended action.
The CEQA analogy was just an example of
Okay, sorry.
taking items in a specific order,
Yep,
but being able to do it at the same meeting.
yes.
We've approved in concept, but I don't have a document.
Exactly.
Okay, I
I
thought there
haven't
were
seen it.
minutes. Were they not in the minutes, the approval of the share? Maybe Dudek could
Yeah, I
respond.
mean, I guess this could be open to interpretation. I don't read it that we actually approved the cost share, that we approved the drafting of an MOU, which lists the administrative cost share responsibilities, I guess, including the costs that were presented at the last meeting.
That's why I'm thinking whatever's going to be distributed to us after the meeting today, we can take that to our respective agencies, bosses, and get them approved, and then we come back in January, we see that that's approved, and then the board can do it. Is that feasible?
That's fine. I just want to caveat, I don't know if we'll have our board approval of that by January, or full board approval process for, you know, it takes 4 months, so.
That's faster.
That's extremely fast.
And
We should probably do
November,
on that now and
December.
then come back to
Okay,
it.
or general once each month, and if it were to go in November, December, that board package would have already had to be submitted.
Last one. So I just want to put that out there. I agree with the approach that we have the draft MOU. We can take that and use that to get our respective approvals from our respective boards. And then when all those are complete, then we can vote as this board on finalizing and adopting.
You don't have a green sheet?
I apologize.
Green sheet, that's when we're recording, right? When the Board of Supervisors decides something's really important, and then they put it on 2 days before it goes on the green sheet. Wasn't in the original release of documents, it's really important, so they put it on the green sheet for consideration.
Look at that, we're learning.
72 hours ahead of time.
We're learning.
I mean, with the
That's
time.
not how DW.
Well, I think with that timeline.
What
it
a
is it is.
surprise.
Yeah.
So I think when I hear that, I guess we'll just each take it back, and when we all have our respective approvals, then we'll come back together on that item then.
And then maybe we have a special meeting just for
Or we
this.
can just agendize it for April.
I don't know
To
that.
give you a
Monica wants to
deadline.
wait that long to get paid, but.
Sorry, we've been waiting already,
We've
it's
been
all
waiting
good.
already.
It's already spent half of it.
Besides, if this is retroactive, then yes, so it include fiscal year 23-24 as well as 24-25.
Yeah, but you could have a special meeting. I think you can discuss that.
Okay.
Well, why don't we see how it goes in January?
So the MOU does have to come back to this board, even though it's not, the GSA isn't a party to the MOU, right? It's the agencies.
I would suggest that it does. You spent so many meetings discussing it. It seems odd not to kind of close that loop with the formal MOU.
Yeah, I think we're just agendizing it here and then to make that formality here. At whichever board meeting that lies.
I think it crosses the Ts and dots the Is.
And the sooner we can approve that, the sooner the LADWP process could start, or is that a
But
separate
I think
track?
we're saying that each agency will go and get separate approval, and then once each representative has authority from its respective body to enter into the agreement, then they'll come back to the board, you'll have a meeting, then you'll vote on it, and then it'll be signed.
Hopefully January.
So maybe we just ask for a January report.
That's what we were just discussing. So I think we want in January, just have another informational item about this. And then once your process is completed, we can either have a special meeting to adopt it or put it on the agenda in April. Does that sound reasonable? Okay.
Yeah, and, or there's, if you want to give a look, there's no magic to having the meeting in January, you could have it in February. The meeting schedule isn't set for next year, so.
It is.
It is set for next year, yeah.
Yeah, it's not on a Wednesday. So.
Yeah, it was approved in the, I think last meeting or maybe even the one before that, so, yeah.
It's not on that.
It will be soon.
All right. Is there clear as mud direction for everybody?
If we're on the administrative cost, can I get direction on the implementation cost portion to our GSA consultant?
I don't see why not.
I guess I might ask our GSA consultant on implementation costs, if you could come back at the next meeting with some examples of how other GSA are managing the implementation cost share, say amongst pumpers, is it, charged by dollar per acre foot pumping, or, yeah, I mean, it's 100%, but how do we split it up between the different pumpers? Is it like per dollar acre foot charge per volume water extracted? Is it, for example, is it, we have projects identified in our GSP over 5 years. Is it a cost share of those identified projects? Just some examples, I think, to all follow this would be great.
Understood.
And there are no individual public speakers signed up for this item?
I have no hands raised.
All right. I think we're moving on to item 8. Item 8 is an action item, reviewing the groundwater extraction ordinance. Ms. Weinberger?
Yeah, let me see, this is gonna test my technical wizardry. I'm gonna stop screen sharing this screen for a minute and hope to open another folder where we have that ordinance. Just got a pretty picture of the mountain with you. That somehow I still seem to be sharing. Yeah, I should say that that mountain is a lovely spot in the Sierras, and I would highly recommend anyone go visit that lake. So this is bringing back the ordinance that was initially discussed at the prior meeting on groundwater extractions. Hopefully in the board packet, everyone received the red line version of this. The red line edits were made in response to comments and direction at the previous meeting, with two notable exceptions where wording was not changed. And I'm going to highlight this discussion of the extraction facility or extraction facilities. There was a discussion at the last meeting of wanting to investigate bringing a little more specificity to that definition. I went back and looked, and that is how Sigma defines extraction facility. So I would recommend not altering the definition from what's presented in the regulations for the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. So I did not make that change, but if the board would like to make that change, feel free to give that direction. The other portion that was not added, there was a discussion at the last board meeting of adding a monitoring, groundwater elevation monitoring section to this ordinance. With the title of the ordinance being extraction facilities, I struggled to find an appropriate place to add groundwater monitoring, groundwater elevation monitoring section to this particular ordinance. I can go back and take a deeper dive into that if given that direction, but I think that it may be cleaner to have requirements associated with new wells or with the operation of wells to install monitoring wells as part of that, or potentially even a separate ordinance on monitoring. That was a judgment call on my part, and I'm seeing some frowns on behalf of the board, so I may get redirection on that. Otherwise, the comments were incorporated into this red line edit, and I believe the attorneys have also had a chance to review it and make red line edits as well.
Thank you, Dr. Weinberger. Are there questions or comments from the board? Yes, Dr. Weinberger.
Not a doctor.
Honorary.
I made enough jokes already that way. Couple comments on the ordinance. I noticed there's a date, I think, to be inserted for compliance with for existing operators, existing extraction facilities, sorry. Should we agree upon a date for the existing to be, because I know the original date that was on here is, we were hoping that I think adopt this much sooner in the year. But it'd be good, I think, if we could agree upon a date. It could be, say, June 30th, 2025, it could be end of the year 2025, to try to get our existing facility to be registered as well. So that's something I think for the board to consider. The other, I think, our GSA consultant, Dr. Weinberg, mentioned the monitoring portion, maybe to split out as a separate ordinance. Do you mind elaborating on that? I understand the challenge trying to squeeze this in here, but then are you suggesting that it'd be easier and cleaner as a separate ordinance for monitoring requirements?
It may be, I think I would defer to legal opinions on that, but yeah, it really stems from my struggle to find an appropriate spot in this particular ordinance, which is so focused on groundwater extractions,
Okay.
to insert a monitoring portion of that, aside from the well metering monitoring. So absolutely a monitoring of the extraction volume, just the groundwater elevation monitoring.
You're just gonna give direction to do more work.
Fair enough.
Thank you.
I've got a
Yes,
question.
Dr. Weinberger.
How does this ordinance, and I apologize for being here at the last meeting, but how does this ordinance overlap with our existing well verification procedures? Because this one refers to all the new facilities as well, and our verification procedures also refers to all the new facilities, and so there's a lot of overlap, I imagine, there. Are we intending to have this supersede the other, or, you know, are we trying to?
I'll try to answer, maybe I'll ask our GSA consultant legal to weigh in, but the verification procedure is just a procedure when there's a new well that, so we can assess the impact on that. This is more of support of our GSP, where it's an ordinance of sort of like a requirement that all well needs to be metered. So this is actually more strength than, I guess, the verification procedures.
But in the verification procedures, I recall from the last time we implemented them, there was requirements for monitoring wells and reporting and all that. So there's a lot of, again, overlap here, right? So.
Yeah, it's because we didn't have actual ordinances to support that. We actually introduced this at the same time as that, and just taken us that long to get to this point for the actual ordinance to support the verification procedures. That's why the January 31st, 2025 date was struck out. So I think at the time we had hoped that this would go hand in hand with the verification procedure, or shortly after. It's just taken us a while to get here.
Thank you for that. Okay. The other question I had is under section 7 with enforcement and penalties. You know, it refers to the water code section 107.32. Are we like, how are those enforcement terms being laid out here and assessed, or?
My understanding, and I will defer very rapidly on this to an expert, is that it would be taken by individual agencies, not by this agency as a whole, but
You have a hand. up.
yes.
Ms. Cola?
Ms. Cola, can you hear us?
Yes, I'm sorry. Uh, Just to clarify, I mean, the purpose of the ordinance is that each of the respective members of the agency has to have this within, the ability to enforce this within their own jurisdictions, because as we've had discussions about this before, the GSA as a whole doesn't have the ability to actually enforce anything within any particular jurisdiction. So this is to give teeth to the, to the substance of the ordinance within each member agency jurisdiction. And it's, at least my understanding from Santa Monica, that Santa Monica would use its own local laws to enforce the ordinance within its jurisdiction, and the others would be expected to do the same. And then the GSA would be kind of a coordination, and a repository for everybody to be acting in concert. If that makes sense.
Anything else for everyone?
So just to, yeah, sorry, one more question. So there's no action that this GSA is taking to adopt this ordinance per se. This is a form ordinance that we're just collaboratively developing for each agency to undertake at their own.
Right, so when each agency goes back to their own respective legislative bodies, they'd probably put something in the staff report to the effect that the GSA reviewed it, approved as to form, and that's their recommendation.
Thank you.
Director Wang? All right. Director Simmons?
Yeah. So maybe I misremembered. I thought the last time this came up, there was some discussion of the enforcement burden on the individual agencies, possibly like underlying that county would, do some of that enforcement if the agency were to leave the GSA. And I wasn't aware that Culver City had sort of agreed to moving forward with the ordinance here, so I just wasn't sure if all agencies were intending on pushing this ordinance to your council, or if there was still some additional discussion about that.
It's under an action item agenda, so.
Right, this last time with the info
Yeah.
item for that discussion.
My recollection is this is an ordinance for the GSA, but the enforcement and penalties must be undertaken by each individual agency within their jurisdiction. So that there is a violation in Beverly Hills enforces. If there's a violation on the VA properties, the county enforces. So if Culver City were to leave the GSA, I don't know. That's an interesting question, Counselor Jacobson, for us to think about. Is the county on the hook for that? Or what would happen with that? But, and I'm not asking for an answer right now, Laura, that's something else to put on our list. But that was my understanding. Each individual jurisdiction is responsible for enforcement within their boundaries for violations of this.
If I may add, this is almost like the opposite of what we were discussing earlier with MOU. In this process is more of the GSA adopts the ordinance on what's required for extraction wells. Right, and then we go back to our respective government bodies to adopt and how we want to enforce that, but this is the recommendation that the GSA would then make to each of the agency that we need a meter, we need to report and register these extraction wells, but as far as enforcement, that's up to each individual agency. And if each individual agency decide to pull out and how that be handled, that's almost a separate issue than what's here.
Right, because this is within our authority under Sigma.
Right.
To implement these as a GSA. It's not who's going to fund the GSA. We need to go back and ask our individual legislative bodies to decide that. in my very, very basic understanding of how this works.
Okay, but the item is an ordinance of each individual city, right? It's not an ordinance of the GSA.
No, it's an ordinance of the GSA.
That's not how
No,
it's
it's
stated.
it's actually.
Not-
Yeah.
here.
Yeah, we don't have the
Never mind.
authority to have pass an ordinance, right?
So that's a legal logistical question, I guess.
We don't until we, if we were to form a JPA, maybe, but right now, the only way that the GSA can have enforcement is through its members within their respective jurisdictions. So even if the GSA were to adopt it as an ordinance with 2 readings, questionable as to whether separate and aside from the ordinance, it could be enforced against the member cities, right? So to me, it's more an issue of the respective member cities have to have the authority and the will to enforce the GSA mandates within their respective jurisdictions.
So Ms. Cola, what would be the approval of this? Is it the GSA board approving the draft of the framework of this for then each agency to take it to the governing bodies?
Yeah, I mean, other attorneys can weigh in, but I believe they could approve the form of this as the recommendation for the ordinance to be adopted by the member agencies. They could adopt a resolution saying, you know, this is what we are saying the member agencies could do or should do or must do. You know, whether the individual agencies agree to that is sort of a separate issue that, you know, we'd have to explore amongst the agents, amongst the attorneys. But, you know, so it could be a directive, but legally, in order to be enforced, each of the legislative bodies of the members has to enforce it within their respective jurisdictions.
So this is another take back to your board.
I guess it's our approval, yeah.
But
it's-
but you can approve as to form.
We need to approve,
Yeah,
yeah.
as an action, you can approve as to form.
Exactly.
So I guess my question is, have all of the member agencies, attorneys approved this, that I could vote to approve it as to form? I wasn't aware that that had happened. That's why I'm asking.
Yes, it was circulated to all the attorneys. There was one change that was recently circulated only because this referenced the executive order, which is no longer in effect, but the substance of what we're asking for, like the metering and the reporting, all of that is authorized independently of the executive order in the water code. So we believe that other than those references, which we deleted, and again, it has been circulated multiple times, we can do it once more, just to make sure everyone is in agreement with that. And then hopefully be ready the next meeting or.
For this
subsequent.
item and for future action items, it would be helpful to have resolution to understand what the board is actually doing. Because I don't think it's entirely clear. Because the action items just says review, the ordinance doesn't say adopt, doesn't say vote on it. It would be more clear with the resolution.
Yeah, I think the intent was to have direction to come back with either a resolution or something, but yeah.
Theoretically, each agency could enforce what's in here independently at their own discretion. Would we really need? What's the intent of making an action on this as a GSA? Is it required?
I think Santa Monica already has an ordinance in place.
Right.
That, I don't know, not necessarily on extraction and reporting, because that's more of like Sigma. Ours is more like, you know, not allowing a well to be installed, period. Not when you install it, you know, what the reporting and monitoring requirements are. This is what that's trying to establish as a GSA as a whole.
But I think you have the legal authority separate and apart from what the GSA does to.
The water code actually speaks to the GSA as requiring through its groundwater sustainability plan that the use of every groundwater extraction facility be measured. So it does contemplate that it's the groundwater sustainability agency that is going to impose the requirement. However, because of the structure, the nature of the way we've structured the GSA, it has to be authorized to be enforced by the individual member agencies. So that's why the GSA action is, that's why we've come before for the GSA approval of this.
Agencies have to agree to the enforcement, but the agencies would be doing the enforcement. Each individual, yes. So that seems. I guess I'd have to understand more about what county permitting entails, and I wasn't completely clear on how Santa Monica's permitting the counties, what the nexus is. So I wouldn't be comfortable voting on something that puts enforcement action on Culver City at this point until I understood that. And I may be the only one without that clarity.
I would also like more clarity on, just from my understanding, how many, the new wells, I get that. But for the existing side of things, I'd like to better understand how many pumpers were, like the scale and magnitude of potential enforcement that we're talking about here before we vote on deciding. So could we ask staff to provide an update or some investigation on what that could be? Is that?
We can certainly ask staff to come back with some answers to these questions, or I should say, our consultant.
I would appreciate that, and especially, obviously all the de minimis ones, aren't included in this, so it shouldn't be that.
So I'm understanding, you want the scope and magnitude of enforcement?
Correct.
Okay.
Of the, basically, how many extractors or, existing facilities, or owners and operators that would need to, be part of this and within their respective jurisdictions.
I guess I'd like to understand also just what the requirement of the GSA is. Because an ordinance like this would go through its own process in each of our agencies and probably be adjusted. And so I couldn't agree to this document anyway. But if it's not an issue of the enforcement, obviously that's a good thing. I'm just thinking logistically and legally. Do we have to take this action at the GSA?
Well, if nothing else, you do want to make sure you have the buy-in from your respective departments or divisions that would be responsible for enforcing this.
I think this is coming out as a recommendation from the GSA for the way we're structured, so that we could enforce within our respective agencies to sustainably manage the groundwater basin. I guess my comment is, for the rest of the directors, like, these questions should have came up at the July meeting when this was presented as an info item to direct staff, not to have this finalized and come back and then ask questions. That's a waste of time.
I'm not going to take, that we wasted time. I think it's been very unclear, and I couldn't approve this regardless. I don't think any of us could. That we would adopt this ordinance.
There's certainly nothing wrong with asking for some clarifications and having it come back. Were there other questions or comments? I did have a couple of questions on the wording in the draft.
Oh, just one other question. I mean, it only thought of it when Susan had mentioned about if we as GSA act to approve this to the form and then subsequently the enforcement thereof, like how, if the agency, doesn't become part of the GSA anymore, or falls off and then are no longer enforcing it, what actions then would happen? I'd like to understand that a little bit better because, like, for example, we had the deadline of January for all the registration, right? Let's say there's a whole bunch of owners that aren't meeting a deadline and the agency does what they can to enforce, but are still unable to get all these owners on, is the GSA now gonna take action against one of the member agencies? I'd like to understand what Susan was alluding to. I'd like to understand that dynamic better.
Susan, did you want to clarify that? Ms. Kohler, rather, can you hear me?
She may actually be doing some work for the city of.
Sorry.
Sonoma.
I was trying to get on there. It's a thorny issue. And so rather than giving you a response off the cuff, I would like to take the time to discuss this with the other attorneys to make sure we're all on the same page as to spotting the issues. I mean, this is something that we've had some discussions on in the past, which is that the GSA in and of itself has no separate authority to actually enforce anything. So the only way that enforcement of the GSA mandates can occur is through its member agencies. And so the only way to do that is to have something in an ordinance which gives the member agencies the legal authority to actually enforce something. Whether if a member agency doesn't do that, based upon the vote, let's say the GSA says to do something, direct something, and the member agency doesn't do that, it does raise the question as to how efficient the GSA can operate in that way. But that's a much bigger question than I can answer right now. So I think we should come back to you and make sure all the attorneys are on the same page as to what they believe the issues are and whether it's really a matter of voluntary cooperation of the member agencies. That's the way we set it up.
All right, so let me get to just a couple of things that I was unclear of in the wording, and I don't, if I missed these last time, I apologize. I do. In section 2, purpose, it says the GSA is charged with the legal responsibility of managing groundwater within the non-adjudicated portion of the basin. Is there an adjudicated portion of the basin?
Yes, there is a sliver of overlap with the adjudication to the south. It is very small. It's discussed in the GSP. I can't remember if it's on the order of 10 or 20 acres. It's a mapping discrepancy, but yes.
I do think there is a cobweb of recognition, remembering that now. Under section 6A, groundwater extraction reporting, I'm wondering why we're using the term water year. Does it matter? Then do we need to define water year? Can we just say year?
Water year is April 1st, generally starts April 1st to.
So water year generally starts October 1st.
October 1st, sorry.
Yeah, and
I'm looking at your.
through September 30th. Sorry, let me just see if it would change the meaning if we struck water.
Because you have the dates in.
So, right,
You could also just define water year.
Well, I think the dates, comment is the date already defined.
it does
Wow.
the date eliminate the need. I believe, I'm comfortable striking water year. If not, I can define it. So, yeah.
Because under B, it might be problematic because it just uses the term water year, but it just seems redundant to me.
Do you have a preference as to striking it or defining it?
I do not.
Okay.
And that was it. Those are the only two things that came to mind this time around. All right, if there's nothing else, it seems to me that our direction, and this is an item, that's an action item, that the proposal and the motion would be to continue this item to January 15th for clarification of the issues raised by the directors. Are there any public comments?
I have no hands up.
Right, with that, then, I suppose I've made the motion. Do we have a second? To continue the item to the
Second.
15th?
Okay, thank you, Director Lynn. Do we want a roll call vote?
Please take the roll.
Okay, Director Bush,
Yes.
Vice Chair Whiting,
Yes.
Director Singletary.
Yes.
Thank you.
Aye.
Motion carries, yes.
All right, moving on to item 9, solicitation of items to be discussed at the next regular board meeting. Do the directors have any items they'd like to discuss next time around that have not been mentioned so far today? All right, I have an item.
Oh,
Yes,
sorry.
go ahead.
I think it was
Ms. Story.
an oversight, but under the bylaws, technically there should have been an election at this meeting, the last meeting of the year, for the chair and vice chair. Yeah, it snuck up on us.
We did because there were those who did not want to be on.
Yeah, so the bylaws state board shall elect a chairperson and vice chairperson by majority vote at its last meeting each year. The outgoing vice chairperson shall be appointed as a new chairperson. The new vice chairperson shall be a board member who did not serve full. So at your next meeting, you may want to do that because it should have been done.
Yeah.
Apologies, I missed that, to
Yeah.
put that on you.
I know, because it came
Yeah.
up so quickly.
Yeah.
Just to clarify, it's not an election, right? You can decide on that rotating structure, right?
Yes.
So is this still considered an election?
And I looked at the amended ones online, if there's another one, I thought
This
we
is
had
still
changed it, that's the amended one. I know we had gone back and forth, but I don't remember where you landed, but I know it was supposed to be done at the end of the.
Yeah, it was the rotation one and you get the option to pass.
Yeah, so again, maybe that is not updated. So whichever the bylaws are, I think you do need to, each year it's supposed to be
I
done.
could have sworn it is.
I feel like you just did.
I did, but that was.
But I do think it needs to be agendized. I
It
don't-
does.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
All right, so there's one item, and then the other item, and I wrote myself notes because I need notes for this, so. Okay, I am concerned that this GSA is not as efficient or effective as it could be, and I think today really shows that as well. So from my perspective as the county representative, we often seem to be pulling in 5 different directions rather than working as a unit. I know the county is ultimately responsible for this basin if no GSA exists, but I prefer we find a way to make this agency more efficient and more effective. I also represent the county on a GSA, which is formed as a JPA, and it has 7 directors. While we don't always agree, we work for the benefit of the GSA and agree on the importance of supporting the GSA. We have dedicated staff and counsel to manage and advise the GSA. Each agency contributes equally, both financially and in running the board meetings. I think the JPA format could improve our functioning and efficiency. I would like to hear at our next board meeting how we could form a JPA to manage the basin. I'd like to know how we would dissolve the MOU and form a JPA. Would we need a unanimous vote to dissolve the MOU? Would such an action affect our GSP or our status with the state? Even the public recognizes that now that we're in the implementation phase of the GSP, our current structure does not seem to be working, either administratively or for the business of the agency. I welcome other ideas for how to better configure the GSA so that we can better manage the groundwater in this basin. Are there any other requests for items on the future agenda?
So if I could just tag on your comment on that, I guess we explore other options. JPA is definitely one option. I wonder if you have a GSA consultant to maybe bring back other alternatives than just a JPA, more efficient structure. There may be other ways other GSA are functioning. Maybe not a JP or other mechanisms to make us more efficient.
Sure. Other governance options.
Yes.
The issue of a JPA or MOU and the legal ramifications, that should be discussed with your attorney. Legal issue, not a consultant issue.
Okay.
Can I just say, I'm happy to provide examples of how other GSAs have formed and functioned, but I agree that I would not weigh in on any of the legal
Yeah,
ramifications of
I didn't-
change.
I didn't say for the consultants, I
No.
just said I'd like it on the agenda. So whoever needs to discuss it and advise us, that's what I would appreciate. All right, hearing no other items, our next regularly scheduled board meeting is 15 January 2025. The Santa Monica Basin GSA is adjourned.
Thank you, it's 10:03, appreciate that.